The chandeliers blazed above like captured constellations, glittering so fiercely they almost blinded those who dared to look directly at them. The grand ballroom was a palace of spectacle, built not merely to host celebrations but to remind every guest of the unshakable distance between wealth and want. The marble floors reflected the light like water, the air alive with the mingling of perfume, champagne bubbles, and the sly laughter of the powerful. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos carried themselves as if the world revolved around their signatures. Women draped in silks and diamonds glided through the room with smiles that looked more like performances than genuine joy. Every corner whispered of influence, greed, and pride. Yet, against the glowing stage of arrogance, one figure barely existed at all. Elena stood by the wall, a silver tray balanced in her trembling hands, her crisp blue uniform pressed but plain, her apron tied with careful neatness. Her dark hair was pinned back in a modest bun, her shoes polished until they shone like mirrors. She carried herself with the posture of dignity, but to most eyes she was invisible, a background presence meant only to serve, not to be seen. The laughter of the wealthy passed over her as though she were nothing but a shadow. It was not the first time she had stood at the edge of this ballroom. Night after night, she had glided between clusters of the city's elite, offering wine, bowing politely, smiling faintly, never breaking the rules of her station. She had learned to keep her voice soft, her movements precise, her emotions locked away. And yet, even in her silence, something burned inside her, a memory she never spoke of, a part of herself long buried beneath duty and survival. Tonight, however, the gods of fate stirred restlessly. The laughter seemed sharper. The music struck a louder chord. Something in the air shifted, though Elena could not yet tell what storm was about to break. At the center of the ballroom stood Victor Devereux, a man whose wealth was rivaled only by his arrogance. His hair was slicked back with precision, his shoes gleamed like polished obsidian, and a diamond pin glittered on his lapel. Victor was the kind of man who believed cruelty was charm, who mistook mockery for wit, and who enjoyed reminding others of their place. He was not the richest man in the city, but he had mastered the art of acting like he was. Tonight, he stood surrounded by his companions, laughing so loudly that the orchestra's violins nearly drowned in the sound. In his hand, Victor waved a folded note like a flag of conquest. His voice boomed above the crowd, a tone that carried arrogance laced with amusement. "This maid here," he said, his finger stabbing the air like a sword, aimed straight at Elena. "Look at her. She doesn't belong in this ballroom." A ripple of cruel laughter spread through the guests. Dozens of eyes turned to Elena, stripping her of what little invisibility she had. Her heart began to pound, the tray in her hands rattling faintly as though it might betray her fear. Victor smirked, his grin spreading wider as he saw the discomfort flicker across her face. He thrived on such moments, on turning people into spectacles for his entertainment. "But I'll give her a chance," he declared, lifting his glass high as if proposing a toast. "Dance the tango right here, right now, and I will marry you on the spot." The crowd erupted, laughter spilling over like champagne foam. The sound was merciless, echoing in Elena's ears until it felt like the whole room had closed in on her. Some clapped mockingly, others whispered jokes, their voices slicing through her dignity. Her face flushed crimson. Her chest tightened as though the air itself had betrayed her. For a fleeting moment, Elena wished she could sink into the polished marble floor and vanish forever. She gripped the tray tighter, her knuckles white, the glasses trembling with each pounding beat of her heart. Yet beneath the storm of humiliation, something else stirred, a voice, faint but firm, whispering in the recess of her mind, "You have nothing left to lose." What Victor and his companions could never have imagined was that Elena's story had begun long before this night of cruelty. Before she was a maid bowing at the edges of grandeur, Elena had been something else entirely. Once she had worn gowns, not aprons. Once she had stood in light, not shadow. Once she had been known, at least in small theaters and lively dance halls, as one of the most graceful tango dancers her city had ever seen. Her name, spoken on the lips of admirers, had carried promise, ambition, and hope. But dreams are fragile things, easily shattered by life's cruel hands. Her father's illness had dragged her family into despair. Medical bills piled like mountains, debts grew heavier than chains. Elena had traded her satin shoes for servants' shoes, applause for silence, mirrors for dull walls. She had buried her dreams, locking them deep inside where no ridicule could reach, or so she thought. Now, standing under the brutal light of mockery, her secret pressed against her heart like a burning coal. The humiliation cut deep, but it also woke something that had long slept inside her. The pianist, sensing the sudden silence after Victor's challenge, hesitated at the keys. Then, almost mischievously, he let his fingers fall upon them. A haunting tango melody spilled into the air, filling the ballroom with a rhythm that had once been Elena's heartbeat. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for her humiliation, eager for a spectacle. They expected clumsy footsteps, awkward turns, the pathetic attempt of a maid who would only deepen their laughter. But as Elena placed the tray gently on the nearest table, her hands no longer trembled. She closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, and lowered her head, not out of shame but out of focus. She called upon every rhythm, every movement, every echo of passion that she had once carried in her soul. When she lifted her eyes, something had changed. Her shoulders straightened. Her gaze sharpened. And with her first step onto the marble floor, a shift rippled through the room. Victor's smirk faltered. His glass nearly slipped from his hand. The maid was no longer invisible. She was about to remind the world who she had been, and who she still was. The first notes of the tango coiled through the ballroom like smoke, wrapping themselves around every ear, drawing every eye to the center of the marble floor where Elena stood. The music was slow at first, deliberate, like the measured beating of a heart. Then it quickened, pulsed, and swelled with fire. And with it Elena moved. She stepped forward, her heels striking with the precision of memory, her body gliding as if the polished floor had been waiting for her return. Her arms extended in perfect poise, her back straight, her head tilted with the grace of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. The laughter that had filled the room only moments earlier died in their throats. Conversations halted. Champagne glasses hung frozen in the air. The audience expected to see a maid stumble awkwardly through steps she could never understand. Instead, they witnessed the reawakening of a dancer who had once lived for this very rhythm. Her feet tapped with sharp elegance, sliding and spinning as though every movement was guided by something divine. Her body bent and curved, flowing with the melody like water tracing the shape of stone. Each turn was precise, each pivot alive with storytelling. The ballroom, once a place of mockery, was suddenly transformed into a stage. And the stage belonged to Elena. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in emerald silk leaned forward, her jeweled hand clutching her husband's arm. A man known for never showing emotion whispered in awe, "Impossible." Even the orchestra faltered, as though their instruments feared they could not keep up with the soul radiating from one woman's body. Victor Devereux, the man who had issued the cruel challenge, stood motionless, his glass trembling in his hand. His grin, once wide and cruel, had vanished entirely. He was pale beneath the golden light, his arrogance bleeding into disbelief. For the first time that evening, Victor realized he was no longer the center of attention. He was merely a witness, and worse, he was the fool who had called this spectacle into being. Elena did not look at him. She did not look at anyone. Her eyes carried her inward, to memories carved deep in her soul. With each twist of her body, she saw again the applause of the small theaters, the flashing smiles of audiences who had once adored her. With each turn she remembered the nights she had danced until dawn, her soul alive with passion and possibility. And with each movement she also remembered the darkness, the day her father's illness consumed their savings, the day debt collectors knocked at their door, the day she folded away her satin shoes and promised herself she would never dance again. Yet here she was. The music pulled her pain into art, shaping every loss into grace. When her heels struck the marble, it spoke of sacrifice. When her arms extended, they told of longing. When her body spun, it carried all the years she had endured in silence. The ballroom had expected a maid's embarrassment. Instead, they were witnessing a confession, a resurrection, a soul set free. The crowd was no longer laughing. They were leaning forward, breathless, pulled into the story her movements told. Some whispered as tears welled in their eyes. Others clasped their hands as though afraid to break the spell. And Victor? He tried to steady himself, tried to laugh, but no sound came. His chest tightened with something unfamiliar, shame. For the first time, the man who mocked others for sport realized he had been outmatched, not in wealth or wit, but in something he could never buy, dignity. The music grew faster, sharp like fire, daring Elena to lose her balance. But she did not falter. Instead she soared. Her body bent low, then spun high, her movements commanding every corner of the ballroom. The chandeliers above seemed dim against the blaze in her eyes. And then, as the melody reached its crescendo, she unleashed the full force of her art. Her arms cut through the air like wings. Her legs struck the marble with thunder. The rhythm carried her, lifted her, crowned her. She was not a maid anymore. She was a queen reclaiming her throne. When the final note struck, Elena froze in a perfect pose, shoulders squared, chin lifted, her chest rising and falling with the breath of triumph. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. For one suspended moment, the room held its breath, as if the world itself dared not break the spell. Then the applause came. It roared through the ballroom like a storm, shattering the silence with thunderous claps, cheers and even cries. People rose from their seats, their faces alight with astonishment and admiration. They clapped not out of politeness, but out of reverence, as though they had just witnessed something sacred. Elena did not smile. She bowed her head slightly, not to them but to herself, to the memory of the girl who had once dreamed of nothing but dance. Her heart ached with bittersweet fire. This performance was not about approval. It was about reclaiming something that life had stolen. Victor finally moved. His face was red, his mouth dry, his arrogance shattered. He stepped forward, fumbling for words that would not come. He wanted to laugh it off, to pretend it had all been a harmless joke, but no one was laughing with him anymore. He stood exposed, the very people who once admired his cruelty now whispering about his humiliation. The whispers grew, spreading like wildfire. The maid silenced the millionaire. The maid danced like royalty. The maid carried more grace than all the diamonds in the room combined. Elena turned from the applause and quietly picked up her tray. Her steps were slow, deliberate, untouched by pride or triumph. She did not need their admiration. She did not need their validation. Her worth had never been theirs to define. And yet, as she walked from the center of the ballroom, every pair of eyes followed her. The once invisible maid was now unforgettable. Victor remained standing, alone in his humiliation. The laughter he had unleashed turned back upon him in whispers. But Elena did not look back. She carried herself with the calm of someone who had won a battle far greater than public opinion. She had fought against despair, against humiliation, against the weight of her own silence, and she had won. The ballroom would never be the same again. Neither would Elena. The applause faded, but the echoes lingered. Even after the last note of the tango had dissolved into silence, the ballroom felt forever altered, as though the chandeliers themselves now burned with a different kind of light. Elena had slipped back into her role, tray in hand, her steps modest and steady. Yet no one could unsee what they had just witnessed. The laughter that had once targeted her had curdled into whispers. But these whispers were different. They did not sting. They followed her like shadows, reverent, uncertain, curious. Guests who had never before noticed her now watched her every move with quiet awe. Those who once sneered at her presence now whispered her name with wonder. "Did you see her feet?" one man murmured. "She danced like she carried fire in her soul," whispered a woman in pearls. "And Victor, oh, did you see his face?" another added, barely concealing her smirk. Victor Devereux tried to recover, forcing a hollow laugh, his voice louder than necessary. "Well, it was all just a bit of fun, wasn't it? A harmless joke." But the words rang false and he knew it. For the first time in years he was not the center of admiration but of ridicule. Wherever he turned he met smirks, raised brows or thinly veiled amusement. His arrogance had been fractured, and he could feel the cracks spreading. Elena meanwhile carried on with quiet dignity. She offered wine. She bowed politely. She returned to her duties as though nothing had happened. Yet inside her, a storm was raging, not of fear or humiliation but of awakening. Her chest still thrummed with the rhythm of the tango. Her heart carried the echo of applause she had once believed she would never hear again. When the evening drew to a close and the guests began to leave, Elena found herself the subject of glances that lingered longer than usual. Some approached her directly. A woman draped in emerald silk, the same one who had gasped in awe during the dance, paused by her side. Her jeweled hand, once lifted in mockery, now offered a small white envelope. "For you," she said softly, her tone stripped of its usual superiority. Inside, Elena later discovered, were tickets to a small dance studio across town. Another guest, an older man with kind eyes who had once ignored her entirely, leaned close and whispered, "I know someone searching for an instructor. You should consider it." His words carried no mockery, only sincerity. Elena accepted these gestures with humility, bowing her head politely, though her heart pounded with something she had not felt in years, possibility. The days that followed unfolded like chapters she had never dared to hope for. Within the mansion, whispers grew louder. Servants who had once overlooked her now treated her with a newfound respect. Some approached shyly, asking if the rumors were true, that she had once been a dancer, that she had graced stages with elegance and poise. Elena only smiled faintly, never boasting, never confirming, but the sparkle in her eyes told them more than words ever could. Beyond the mansion the story spread. In cafes, in parlors, in drawing rooms, people spoke of the maid who silenced a ballroom with her courage. Some exaggerated, saying she danced like a goddess. Others romanticized, claiming she had bewitched the pianist into playing. But no matter how the tale twisted, one truth remained: Elena was no longer invisible. Victor Devereux, however, could not escape the humiliation. For weeks, wherever he went, people reminded him of that night, not openly but through sly comments, hidden smirks, or polite jabs. "Careful who you challenge, Victor," one man chuckled at a luncheon. "Not everyone is as powerless as they seem." His pride, once untouchable, had been pierced by a maid's dance and the wound festered. Yet for Elena, the humiliation of her past was no longer her burden. She had reclaimed something greater: her voice, her fire, her dignity. She continued her daily duties, scrubbing, dusting, carrying trays, but her evenings were different now. She took the tickets from the Emerald Silk Woman and visited the small dance studio. Its mirrors were cracked, its floors worn, but the moment Elena stepped onto that polished wood, the fire in her soul surged. She practiced in silence, each step reminding her of who she had once been. Soon children began to arrive. Curious mothers signed them up for lessons, whispering about the mysterious maid who danced like royalty. Retired couples came, too, eager to rekindle the passion of their youth through the tango. Even weary workers found themselves in her studio, seeking not perfection but joy. Elena taught them not just how to move their feet, but how to carry their souls through every step. She told them that dance was not about perfection but about feeling, about telling stories with the body. And as her students laughed, stumbled, and tried again, Elena realized that her pain had become her gift. Her sacrifices had given her the power to inspire others, to remind them that even broken dreams could become new beginnings. Still, there were moments when doubt whispered at her ear. She would catch her reflection in the cracked mirror and see not a teacher, not a dancer, but a maid with calloused hands and tired eyes. But then she would remember the faces in the ballroom, the hush that had fallen when she first moved, the thunder of applause. She would remember the fire she had carried across that marble floor, and she knew it was real. One evening, as she was closing the studio, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw Victor Devereux. His arrogance had dimmed, his posture less certain. He removed his hat, fumbling with it awkwardly, his voice hesitant. "Elena," he began, I owe you an apology." His eyes searched hers as if hoping for forgiveness, or perhaps simply relief from his own guilt. "I should never have mocked you. It was foolish." Elena studied him in silence. For a moment she saw not the millionaire who had humiliated her, but a man stripped bare of his pride, desperate to erase his own shame. She bowed politely, her face calm, her voice steady. "Your apology is not mine to carry," she said quietly. Then she turned back to her studio, leaving him standing in the doorway. Victor lingered for a moment, uncertain, before slipping back into the night. Elena's heart did not tremble. She no longer needed anything from him, not his guilt, not his regret, not even his respect. She had already reclaimed everything that mattered. And slowly, in the quiet glow of the dance studio, Elena began to understand something deeper. Her worth had never depended on the applause of the wealthy or the cruelty of the arrogant. It had always been within her, waiting for the right moment to blaze forth. The maid who had once been invisible was now a teacher, a storyteller, and a symbol. The whispers that had once mocked her now carried her name like a song. And somewhere deep inside, Elena knew this was only the beginning. Seasons shifted, and with them, the whispers about Elena grew into something more enduring. What had begun as gossip about a maid who humiliated a millionaire became a quiet legend that wove itself through the streets of the city. Children repeated her story as though it were a fairy tale. Older women told it with pride, seeing in her a reflection of resilience they themselves had carried. Even men who had once measured worth only in gold admitted, though grudgingly, that dignity could not be bought. Elena herself never sought the legend. She rose before dawn, carried out her duties with the same precision, and returned to the studio at night. Yet, without meaning to, she had become a symbol, not because she had silenced a cruel man, but because she had reminded people of something they had forgotten, that greatness can be hidden in the quietest of souls. Her studio blossomed. Children laughed as their shoes tapped on the worn wooden floor. Couples rediscovered each other through the intimacy of the tango, their hands clasped, their movements shy at first, then bold. Even those who believed they had no rhythm at all walked away lighter, as though Elena had taught them not steps, but freedom. One evening, as the studio filled with music and laughter, Elena stood by the mirror and watched. She did not dance. She did not need to. Watching others find their joy through movement filled her heart more deeply than any applause ever had. For the first time in years she did not ache for the stage. She had found something greater, the power to awaken hope in others. But the world did not forget Victor Devereux. His name, once synonymous with arrogance, now carried a shadow. No amount of wealth could erase the image of him silenced by the maid's dance. He withdrew from the spotlight, attending fewer galas, speaking with less thunder. Some said he had been humbled. Others said he simply feared ridicule. But for Elena he no longer mattered. She had left him in the past where he belonged. And yet, his challenge had given her back her life. Cruelty had been the spark, but courage had been the fire. Years later, when people spoke of that fateful night, they did not mention the brand of champagne served or the gowns worn. They did not remember the speeches or the contracts signed in whispered corners. They remembered only the maid who placed down her tray and stepped into the music with a grace that silenced wealth itself. Some said it was fate. Others said it was defiance. Elena knew it was neither. It was choice. A choice to stand when she could have run. A choice to move when fear demanded stillness. A choice to carry her hidden fire into the light. Her students often asked her why she had chosen to dance that night. Elena would pause, her eyes drifting to the cracked mirror that had become her companion. Because, she would answer softly, sometimes the world gives you one cruel chance. And you must decide whether to let it break you or to let it awaken you. The city came to see her not as a maid, not even just as a dancer, but as a symbol of resilience. Her story was told in schools, whispered in markets, carried in songs. And though Elena never sought fame, she accepted her role as a reminder that worth is never defined by position, but by the fire carried within. She grew older, her hair touched with silver, her hands lined with time. But even as her body slowed, the light in her eyes never dimmed. She no longer needed chandeliers or marble floors. She had built her own stage, one that stretched far beyond the ballroom. On her final night in the studio, long after the last student had left, Elena stood alone in the silence. She placed one hand against the mirror, closed her eyes, and let the memory of that fateful tango return. The music played only in her mind, but her body remembered. She moved once more, slow and steady, every step carrying a lifetime. And as she finished, she bowed her head, not to an audience but to herself. The maid who had once been invisible had become unforgettable. Her legacy was not the applause, not even the whispers. It was the fire she had awakened in others, a reminder that no matter how deep the world tries to bury you, your light can never truly be extinguished. It waits, patiently, for the moment you choose to let it shine.